What would you do if you had a crush on your beautiful classmate and finally confessed to her? But once you start dating, you realize that she's a weird girl who's only got one thing on her mind, and all the other crazy girls in your life are the same. Well, that's exactly what happens to Haruka, an ordinary high school boy who's always had a crush on Akiho, his beautiful, smart, and talented classmate. After school, Haruka finally musters up the courage to confess to Akiho and asks her to be his girlfriend. And to his surprise, she agrees, but she then warns him that she doesn't have any dating experience, and will therefore need to study all 48 basic mating positions, which makes Haruka start to suspect that something may be wrong with his new girlfriend. But he quickly brushes this off and spends the rest of the day in blissful glee as he thinks about his new girlfriend, who then interrupts his daydreaming in order to learn more about him. But to Haruka's surprise, Akiho only asks him questions about what turns him on. Haruka embarrassingly replies that he's only into normal stuff, but Akiho is unsatisfied with this answer and demands that he explain his kinks in 40,000 words or more. Later that day, while walking back to class together, Akiho realizes that couples should give each other cute and intimate nicknames, and believing that Haruka is a masochist, she decides to call him a filthy pig. A confused Haruka decides to simply ignore her, while an embarrassed Akiho realizes that she's not fit to be the dominant one. During their lunch break, Haruka asks Akiho if he can have pictures of her now that they're dating, to which she replies that she already took a bunch of explicit pictures for him in preparation of this moment. Flustered, Haruka refuses to see these pictures because he's a moron, and instead insists that he only wants a picture of her face, which still ends up surprising him. Later that day, Shizuku, Haruka's upperclassman and childhood friend, visits their class and is surprised to learn that Haruka now has a girlfriend. In response, she decides to tease them by clinging to Haruka and by pretending that her relationship with him is far more intimate than it actually is, but goes a bit too far and actually manages to make Akiho jealous. To make up for this, Shizuku decides to show her some love too. Afterwards, Akiho is upset because she wants to become a better girlfriend, and in pursuit of this goal, she invites Haruka to meet her in the gym's storage room, which leads to him fantasizing about what they might do there. But when he opens the door, the reality is far more shocking, and Haruka realizes that his girlfriend really puts the hoe in Akiho. She then apologizes for her behavior and explains that she mistakenly believed Haruka was a masochist. She then pulls out a sketchy magazine and suggests that they replicate what's inside so they can grow even closer. But upon taking a deeper look at the contents, Akiho realizes that this is far more intense than she expected, and changes her mind. After school, Akiho still feels uneasy about how close Haruka is with his childhood friend, and laments about how inexperienced she is as a girlfriend. However, Haruka puts her at ease by reassuring her that he likes her just as she is, and that she already makes him happier than he could have ever imagined. Akiho blushes upon hearing this and becomes too embarrassed to face her boyfriend. Later that night, Kanata, Haruka's little sister, barges into his room and asks him for his undivided attention and affection. But when she sees that he's ignoring her because he's texting with someone named Akiho, Haruka is forced to reveal that he actually has a girlfriend now. This greatly shocks Kanata, but she tries to play it cool and says that she's fine with it because nothing will ever get in the way of their sibling bond. When she leaves her brother's room, however, she's unable to hide her true feelings. The next day at school, Kanata tries to sneak into her brother's classroom, but he catches her and lectures her in the hallway. Suddenly, Akiho arrives and introduces herself to Kanata, who is immediately taken aback by how beautiful her brother's girlfriend is, and due to her immense jealousy, Kanata begins bragging about the deep and intimate relationship she shares with Haruka, which Akiho obviously misinterprets, but Kanata doesn't correct her. Later on, while Haruka and Akiho have lunch together, a spying Kanata once again intrudes on them and explains that she wants to eat lunch with her brother, but in the process, she accidentally pushes Akiho to the ground. As she falls, Akiho apologizes to Haruka for being a bad girlfriend by accidentally preventing him from sneaking a peek under her skirt. Kanata then apologizes to Akiho, which she immediately forgives, and the two become friends. Once back home, Akiho watches TV and realizes that a proper girlfriend should cook her boyfriend a special bento. So the next day at school, she brings Haruka a homemade bento, but decides not to give it to him because of a deadly aura emanating from it, and she instead decides to beg Shizuku to teach her how to cook. That weekend, the three of them prepare a meal together at Shizuku's home, which turns out great despite the use of suggestive ingredients and Shizuku's incessant teasing. But after their meal together, Shizuku continues to tease the two by telling them that she wants to eat Haruka's banana for dessert. Surprisingly, Haruka agrees to this and readies his banana. But despite her teasing, Shizuku looks away flustered, while claiming that she's not mentally ready for this yet. But when Haruka reveals that he really is just holding a normal banana, Shizuku feels completely silly and refuses to let anyone know what she was truly thinking. A few days later at Akiho's house, she tells her parents that her boyfriend is coming to visit them today. Her father, Natsuo, is a bit tense about meeting his daughter's first boyfriend, so he decides to go out for a walk. Meanwhile, Yumi, Akiho's mother, sends her daughter to go buy groceries for lunch. Surprisingly, Haruka arrives earlier than expected, while Akiho and her father are out of the house. Akiho's mother answers the door, which Haruka confuses for Akiho as they look so similar. Once inside the house, Yumi shows Haruka her daughter's picture album, as Natsuo watches from outside because he feels too awkward to go inside. Instead, he reminisces about how quickly Akiho has grown, and thinks back to his wife's strange parenting techniques, such as when she taught Akiho that she shouldn't cry over ripped paper, because when she gets older some guy will rip something of hers that will really make her cry, or when she taught her that it was important to swallow thick loads. Akiho then returns with lunch, and after a day filled with questionable conversations, Haruka realizes how similar his girlfriend is to her mother, but he does get along quite well with her seemingly normal father. When it's finally time for Haruka to leave, Yumi worries that she failed at entertaining her daughter's boyfriend, but Natsuo reassures her that she's done a wonderful job as both a mother and a wife. The next day, Haruka and Akiho head out on their first date, but while on the train, they encounter a shameless couple where the man brags about wanting to show off his ultimate technique. Haruka is made uncomfortable by this, while Akiho takes notes. She then mimics the shameless man by grabbing Haruka and offering to show him her ultimate technique. The two then head to the movies together, and Haruka is relieved that their date is going normally so far. But this quickly changes when the movie ends up being far more explicit than he expected, and Akiho continues to take notes. At the end of the date, Akiho is disheartened after realizing that she hasn't paid enough attention to Haruka because she was so captivated by the movie, so to make it up to him, she invites him on another date to watch the cherry blossoms together. But the next day, she falls ill and is forced to cancel their date. She does eventually manage to recover, however, and the two head off on their date. But when they arrive at the park, they realize that the cherry blossoms have all already fallen, which greatly devastates Akiho. But when Haruka promises to see the cherry blossoms with her again next year, Akiho's mood is immediately lifted, as she realizes that Haruka plans to be with her for a long time. The next day at school, a new transfer student named Rina joins Haruka and Akiho's class and reveals that she transferred from an all-girls school to a mixed-gender one, so she could learn about romance with a man. Seeing how close Haruka and Akiho are, Rina decides to approach them, and admits to them that she wants to make friends, but doesn't know how to deepen friendships, especially with boys. Throughout the rest of the day as they try to help Rina out, her phrasing and weird mannerisms cause several misunderstandings that end up being too much for Haruka to handle. Later that day, Haruka introduces Rina to Shizuku, who immediately feels insecure after seeing how much bigger Rina's chest is to hers. Unfortunately for Haruka, he unwillingly ends up caught up in the middle of this. At the end of the day, Rina bids goodbye to her new friends by giving them both a kiss on the cheek, which greatly embarrasses them and makes Akiho slightly jealous. The next day, Rina invites the couple and Shizuku to the zoo, which Akiho's parents coincidentally also decide to visit. While out on their date, Haruka finds himself confronted with all sorts of ambiguous illusions while observing the wildlife, and his day is once again filled with all kinds of innuendos. But when the sun starts to set and the gang gets ready to head home, Shizuku takes Rina away with her to give the couple some space. But just as they're about to hold hands, Akiho's parents arrive out of nowhere and accidentally interrupt them. Sometime later at school, Akiho and Shizuku confront Haruka while wearing animal ears, but Akiho gets a little bit too in character and starts role-playing as a cat cuddling with Haruka's legs. Later that day, they see their classmate, Hoshikawa, surrounded by girls, which makes Haruka think that Hoshikawa must be super popular with the ladies. Later in the school corridor, Haruka spots Akiho talking to Hoshikawa, and he begins to fear that he might be trying to steal his girlfriend. So after mustering up enough courage, he approaches the two and confronts Hoshikawa, but quickly learns that the popular boy was actually just asking Akiho to help him make more male friends. In response, Haruka agrees to be his friend, but Akiho worries that Hoshikawa's intentions might not be so pure, and to Akiho's horror, Hoshikawa begins to take a rather unhealthy interest in her boyfriend, plunging her into a state of panic every time she sees them together. Sometime later during their school's summer sports festival, Haruka is determined to prove himself as a cool guy to Akiho by participating in a baseball tournament. But to his despair, his baseball skills are below average, so Hoshikawa offers to teach him how to hold a bat. But moments later, Akiho arrives and catches them in the act, mistakenly believing that the two are doing questionable things. On the day of the tournament, however, Haruka's practice doesn't pay off as he ends up accidentally hitting Hoshikawa in a rather sensitive spot, which he surprisingly enjoys. And at the end of the day, Haruka is disappointed with his performance, but finds out that Akiho is actually really happy that he tried his best just for her. Sometime later, Haruka, Akiho, and the rest of their classmates embark on their annual school camping trip, where Haruka continues to be the victim of misunderstandings and inappropriate jokes. Meanwhile, back at school, Shizuku misses Haru greatly, and back home Kanata cuddles a plushie while thinking about her older brother. But when it's finally nighttime at the camping trip, the students prepare for the test of courage, where they need to make it through a spooky forest without soiling their pants. Suddenly, Akiho clings to Haruka, but not because she's afraid of the test, but rather because she's worried that Hoshikawa might try something weird. Her fear quickly becomes a reality, however, when Hoshikawa appears in a questionable Tarzan-like outfit, which causes a lot of chaos among the frightened students and leads to Akiho and Rina ending up in a weird position, as well as Haruka and Hoshikawa. And upon seeing this terrifying figure in the dark, the class representative gets scared and starts crying, bringing the test of courage to a sudden end. Later that night, Haruka invites Akiho for a late-night walk, which she mistakenly believes is just an excuse to lure her somewhere shady so they can do the nasty. But after telling him that she's not ready yet, Haruka reveals that he just wants to enjoy the beautiful scenery with her, and the two embarrassingly hold hands and conclude their camping trip in a wholesome manner. Several days later at school, Igarashi, the student council president, grows mad from seeing several couples around school becoming increasingly lovey-dovey after the camping trip. While investigating, she sneaks inside a room where a couple had previously been spotted, and when she opens the locker she finds another girl there who was secretly peeping on the couple. The two then accidentally get locked inside the locker just as Haruka and Kanata coincidentally walk in, and he accidentally spills milk on his sister's face, causing the two girls in the cabinet to misunderstand the situation. And upon hearing noise, Haruka opens the cabinet, and a flustered Igarashi runs away while calling him a little sister-loving creep, which is really just another name for anime fans. Later that day, Igarashi decides to confront Haruka and promises to one day expose him as the creep she thinks he is. But while she berates him, Haruka tries to let her know that her skirt is stuck in her panties, but Igarashi misunderstands his gestures and believes he's just shamelessly being a creep again. When she eventually realizes the truth, however, she becomes extremely embarrassed, so Haruka decides to help her out. This makes Igarashi think that perhaps Haruka isn't such a bad guy after all. A few days later, Akiho has to cancel her date with Haruka in order to take her father to the hospital. Unfortunately for Haruka, he's already at date's location when he receives this news. Suddenly, however, he runs into Shizuku, who immediately jumps on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go on a date with Haruka, and even lures him back to her house since her parents aren't home, where she manages to accidentally lock herself up in cuffs while trying to play a prank on Haruka. To make matters worse, they are unable to find the key, and Haruka has to take care of Shizuku's needs for the rest of the day. But when she teasingly asks him to bathe her, Haruka of course refuses. At the end of the day, Shizuku thanks Haruka for taking care of her all day, and she's happy to see that having a girlfriend hasn't changed her childhood friend. Ironically, Haruka also realizes that his childhood friend hasn't changed at all when he peeks at her peach and sees the key in her pocket. The next day, Akiho decides that she'll make a lunchbox for her boyfriend as an apology for missing the date, but she fails at her attempts and ends up creating a serious health hazard. With nothing to offer him, she becomes disheartened and grows even more upset as she watches Shizuku and Hoshikawa both teasing her boyfriend. But despite Akiho's nasty-looking food, Haruka still asks her to let him eat the lunch she made, because he knows how much effort she put in it for him, which brings a smile to his girlfriend's face. The next day at school, the classes have already ended and all the students have left except for Haruka, who is still sleeping in class. Akiho then appears and tries to pat his head, but when he wakes up, she instinctively pretends to be asleep, and Haruka is the one who ends up patting Akiho's head instead, which causes her to wake up and run away in embarrassment. The next day, the class is out sketching for their art class, but Haruka fails to find a suitable model that doesn't have ulterior motives. Suddenly, Akiho offers him her services as a model, but quickly becomes embarrassed at having Haruka stare at her so passionately. But as he looks at her beauty, Haruka soon finds himself reminiscing about the fun they've had together and tells Akiho that he loves her. And upon hearing this, she hides her face in embarrassment, but manages to muster up enough courage to tell him that she loves him too. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I hope to see you all again in the next recap.